If your internet search history looks anything like mine, you've probably heard of the term third place. It's not a bronze medal. It's where, according to sociologist Ray Oldenburg, people spend time between home, the first place, and work, the second place. They are locations where we exchange ideas, have a good time, and build relationships. The third place has been aptly compared to a community's living room. It's unpretentious, accessible, and animated by conversation. It's a library, a community center, a church, a park, a barbershop, a stoop, or even the sidewalk. The primary purpose of people inhabiting a third place is, for lack of better terms, to simply vibe. It's a rare occasion when the internet can unanimously agree on something, and when it comes to the online conversation about third places, there's a general consensus that we need more of them.
One important question that you should be asking yourself is, do you have a third place?
This is what it looks like inside of a great third place because of how rare they are.
I'm going to suggest that you find a third place.
Our generation is so depressed because we don't have a third place.
In the wake of the pandemic, people have admitted to being lonelier than ever. If the 2010s was about optimizing our lives for productivity, it seems the 2020s are about optimizing our lives for connectivity. People are joining clubs, moving closer to friends, and actively seeking out third places to give their social lives a much-needed makeover. You'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who is actively anti-third place.
That's what you said. And you know what? What was that? Okay, James.
But this newfound fixation reveals just how much they've been taken for granted. In America, the first place, the home, reigns supreme. We've siphoned off whole sections of forest for them. They're called the suburbs, and they're the epitome of personalization of public amenities. Who needs a park when you have a backyard complete with your own patio, swing set, and pool? Now you can practically do anything from home, whether it's working out, watching the latest blockbuster, or crafting your own artisanal latte. But these conveniences come at the expense of creating and maintaining social connections. That's where third places come in, and that's what I'll be exploring in today's video. I recently watched Emma Chamberlain's video titled Stories from My Childhood, and what really stood out to me is the amount of third places she frequented. There was the park, the local coffee shop, the candy store, even just the sidewalk on the main street. These locations seemed fundamental to her life between her first place, home, and what I would argue is the kid version of the second place, school. I was fascinated by this because these were establishments she could get to on her own as a tween and teen. She could walk there or take public transportation. Her parents didn't need to accompany her. She could explore on her own or with her friends. This is the exact opposite of my childhood experience. I couldn't go anywhere unless an adult was able to drive me. This isn't to say I didn't have third places. I did in a sense, but I didn't have freedom. And I know it sounds dramatic, but that's the truth. Freedom and third places go hand in hand. One of the primary characteristics of a third place is that occupants have little to no obligation to be there. There's a distinct difference between third places when you have the autonomy to come and go as you please, and third places where you are there by virtue of your parents being there. Hence, the primary third place of my childhood was church. I had no choice but to be there every Sunday. Emma describes the place she grew up in, San Bruno, California, as sleepy. I feel like that's how most people describe their childhood towns, especially after moving to a big city. If sleepy were a synonym for boring, I too would describe where I'm from as sleepy, except sleepy implies a certain charm. There is no charm to be found in my hometown. Charm is the stuff of storybooks and shops spelled shop with an E, and shops with an E are invariably found on quaint, sidewalk-lined main streets. There's no sidewalks and no main street where I'm from. There are strip malls, subdivisions, and if you're lucky, the occasional Starbucks, a corporation's endeavor to create a nationwide third space. Growing up, I was obsessed with Starbucks. They made drinking milkshakes at 8 a.m. socially acceptable because they were called frappuccinos. I don't have such a romantic view of Starbucks as an adult. It's a corporation that has come under scrutiny for a variety of good reasons, but you can't talk about third places in America without mentioning Starbucks. Third places have existed long before Starbucks opened its doors in 1971, but in areas that lack gathering places, like suburbs, Starbucks fills the void. In this way, it was a game changer. Besides church, the third space of my formative years was the Barnes & Noble that had a built-in Starbucks, which also sold Cheesecake Factory products. Corporate collaborations aside, it was a place where I could sip my sugary drinks and post up in a plush armchair while flipping through a YA novel for hours. I didn't really interact with anyone besides my siblings or parents because I was a shy kid with a deep fear of talking to people who were not related to me, but simply being there was enough to satiate my social battery. I didn't know it then, but that Starbucks was the origin of my lifelong love affair with little treats and third spaces. Looking back, it's really funny to me that the third space I most identified with was Barnes & Noble / Starbucks, because I feel like the de facto third place of most Americans' youth is the mall, which, by the way, that was inside the mall, but I didn't really go into the actual mall. I was never a mall rat. I just didn't understand the appeal of wandering around a fluorescent lit warehouse filled with clothes I didn't have money for when I could window shop online and make polyvore outfits from the comfort of our family's desktop computer. Back to Starbucks though, it could just be my changing taste, but as I've gotten older, Starbucks has felt less and less like a third place to me. It's probably because I'm spoiled with a city that's teeming with local coffee shops. It feels like a waste to go to Starbucks when you could be supporting a small business. At this point, Starbucks to me feels less like an indulgence and more like a utility, especially when you can order on the app and pick up your order to go. There are now whole stores dedicated to the pickup experience, places where you couldn't order from a person even if you wanted to. While they're no doubt efficient, you don't even get the tiny dose of human interaction that Starbucks promises, saying your name to the barista, confirming that you are in fact a person who is alive and breathing. My changed perception of Starbucks is almost certainly informed by the transformation of the Starbucks at my old college campus. When I arrived, it was an ambiently lit petri dish full of college students from all walks of lives. There was ample seating, tables, and if you were lucky, you got to sit in the overstuffed leather armchair. But 2 years into my tenure, seemingly overnight, the place was gutted. There was no more furniture except for those ropes that corral people into a huge winding line, and it was painted a stark white. The place had absolutely no vibes to speak of. There was no loitering or conversation to be had. You couldn't even distract yourself by looking around. There was nothing to look at. It was basically a ghost kitchen that served coffee. It was no longer a third space. It was like waiting in line at the DMV. Initially, I thought they just did this redesign because of the pandemic and social distancing, but they've kept it like this ever since, and it's kind of depressing. The bare bones coffee shop, whose minimalism feels ironically excessive, is more ubiquitous than ever. Blank Street Coffee comes to mind. It feels like a pastiche of this austere cafe aesthetic. It's a venture capitalist-backed coffee chain that Eater magazine denounced as oppressively bland. The seating, if any, is stiff and unforgiving. It's not the kind of place that encourages you to linger. While inspired by its scale, Blank Street is a far cry from Starbucks' early design ethos of feeling like a hyper-local, customized coffee shop. Blank Street, on the other hand, leans into the easily replicable and aggressively nondescript. While I want to condemn the bland coffee shop that feels like a glorified WeWork, I honestly can't as someone who doesn't have a formal workplace. On paper, my third place is a variety of local coffee shops, but because I'm self-employed, I typically use those cafes as a second place, a workplace. I have headphones on, I'm trying to focus on whatever I'm reading or writing. They're not places where I socialize with regulars or frequently meet new people. I appreciate the pseudo office-like coffee shop with its abundance of outlets, free Wi-Fi, and instrumental music because it is more conducive for me being productive. But these kinds of coffee shops are, to me, daytime coffee shops. They're for getting work done. They feel more like second places than third places. But the cozy coffee shops with sunken couches and fairy lights and board games are nighttime coffee shops. They feel like third places, but they're increasingly rare. In 2022, the newsletter Blackbird Spyplane coined these spaces as ungrammable hang zones, which I think is kind of the ideal third place. They define them as warm, welcoming, unpretentious places that proliferated in the 90s back in the quainter, earlier days of globalization. Key signifiers include, but are not limited to, big saran-wrapped cookies studded with M&Ms for sale alongside enormous muffins with jumbo chocolate chips, a bulletin board with a bunch of drummer wanted and cat sitter available flyers, stained glass fixtures that look like this. If you recognize the distinct vibe, you might have been lucky enough to find yourself in an ungrammable hang zone, or you've seen a more polished version of it on TV thanks to friends. This article reminded me that I was blessed enough to have frequented an ungrammable hang zone in my high school years. It was a coffee shop, but it called itself a coffee sanctuary, so I think that tells you everything you need to know about it. They had comically large cookies. It had a pitched roof, so the ceiling sloped in a really cozy attic-like way. They had every Torani syrup under the sun, and they would make drinks with names like Chad's Caramel Koala Latte, and they would serve them in these thick-lipped, chunky ceramic mugs with no saucer. I feel like that's how you know you're in a legit ungrammable hang zone. Places that give you a saucer are decidedly doing too much. Also, this cafe was open until like 9 p.m. So in my senior year of high school, I'd go there on a Friday evening and just chat and hang out and read poetry with my friends. Now that I think about it, it was a quintessential third space. In the past year, I've come to the conclusion that I am an introvert, but I am not a homebody. I feel like these two things are often conflated because people who are introverts tend to not want to go out as much and stay inside. I identify as an introvert because I recharge by being alone. However, I do not like sitting in my apartment all day and night. I get stir crazy very fast. I have to interact with the world, but I don't necessarily have to be with other people I know to do that. So even just going on a walk is great. Being in the general public domain is enough for me to fulfill that desire. I don't know that I actually have a current third place. I think the coffee shops I go to are near that realm, but the primary activity for me isn't conversation, it's working. Then when I go to a place like a bar, it's for a specific reason, like an open mic or trivia. I'm not interacting with the patrons at large. I think that's why I like to give myself small challenges sometimes where I'm like, okay, talk to one new person, even if it's just a very quick exchange, like, hey, cool shirt, I feel accomplished. I do like the idea of being a regular somewhere and knowing that you will have conversations with people even if you show up alone and don't plan ahead with a friend. The idea of showing up to a neighborhood bar and knowing that someone you know is going to be there on a Saturday night is really cool. I hope after living in the same neighborhood for an extended period of time, I can get to this point. I think this also speaks to the power of being friends with people who live near you or living near your friends. There's so much more opportunity for serendipity, spontaneity, and just unstructured hangout time, which brings me to a theory I call your friend's apartment is actually a third place. Even though to them, it's their home, their first place, to you, it's basically a third place, especially if they're a great host like so many of my friends are, and they're showering you with tea and snacks. It feels like just hanging out in a private cafe. Recently, I joined a writers group that one of my friends started, and someone different will host at their apartment every week. Even though we're not in the same location, it's the same people, same vibes, so it kind of feels like a traveling third space. I hope this video inspired you to think about third places and what they mean to you, and if you're seeking one out, I think it is important to remember that third places are ultimately about community, and it can take time to build that up and find one. So don't beat yourself up about it if it doesn't happen overnight or even in a year. Life is long. You've got time. But yeah, I'm excited to hear your thoughts about third places below, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.